In a glittering Manhattan gym filled with polished floors, state-of-the-art equipment, and athletes who paid fortunes just to belong, silence fell the moment she walked in. An 18-year-old girl with skin the color of resilience, sneakers worn thin, and a sports bag stitched back together with thread. To most, she looked out of place, like an intruder in a kingdom built for the privileged. To one arrogant champion, she looked like prey. What followed inside those walls would shock everyone who witnessed it. A world-renowned boxer, undefeated and adored by millions, decided to make an example out of her, to humiliate her in front of the crowd, to prove that some people, no matter how determined, simply don't belong. Cameras were ready, social media was waiting, and the stage was set for what many expected to be a cruel spectacle. An easy victory for the champion, and a painful reminder of society's cruel hierarchy. But arrogance has a way of clouding vision. And what no one in that gym realized was that this outsider carried a storm inside her, a storm forged in struggle, sharpened in silence, and waiting for the exact moment to strike. What began as a mockery turned into something unforgettable. The moment the world saw that dignity cannot be beaten down, and that lightning can strike when you least expect it. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Hidden Black Stories, the place where untold stories of struggle, resilience, and triumph come to life. These are stories that deserve to be remembered because they remind us that dignity and courage can rise even from the harshest circumstances. Now, let's return to that gym in Manhattan. Kesha Campbell had not come by accident. She wasn't lost, nor was she chasing some fantasy of fame. She came with a purpose, one carried on her back like the weight of her family's hopes. Just 6 months earlier, Kesha had left Jamaica, leaving behind the narrow streets of Kingston, where survival was often decided with fists. Her mother had sold jewelry, neighbors had passed around envelopes with small contributions, and strangers in her community had whispered blessings. Also, Kesha could pursue what no one else in her family had dared to dream, a chance at something bigger. In New York, however, life was far from glamorous. She cleaned offices at night, scrubbed toilets until her hands ached, and worked double shifts just to afford a cramped room in the Bronx she shared with 3 other immigrants. The gym she entered that day was not one she could ever dream of affording. It was a palace for the privileged, where the monthly membership alone cost more than 3 months of minimum wage. But there was one loophole, an underfunded scholarship program that promised access to disadvantaged youth who showed promise. For Kesha, it was the only chance to train in a facility where she could sharpen her skills, maybe even turn her natural ability into something real. But the world she stepped into was not built for her. The walls were lined with glossy posters of champions, faces that didn't look like hers. Trainers and athletes carried themselves with entitlement, speaking the unspoken language of wealth and status. And towering over them all was Victoria Sterling, the undefeated women's world boxing champion. At just 26, Victoria was as famous for her ruthless knockouts as for her venomous tongue. Her career thrived not just in the ring, but online. With millions of followers, every arrogant post she made, every insult about her opponents, every sneer about being naturally superior, was shared and celebrated. She was not just a boxer, she was an influencer, a brand, a spectacle. When she saw Kesha step into the gym, wearing sneakers that had more holes than soles and carrying a second-hand bag, she didn't see determination. She saw entertainment. To Victoria, Kesha wasn't a fighter. She was a joke, an opportunity to flex her dominance not just in the ring, but on the screens of millions who loved to watch others fall. The room quieted because everyone knew what usually happened to people like Kesha in places like this. They were laughed at, ignored, dismissed before they could even lace up gloves. The whispers carried, "She doesn't belong here. She can't possibly last a round." But one person in the building knew better. Tom Rodriguez, the veteran trainer and owner of the gym. With decades of experience shaping champions, Tom had seen something in Kesha's application, something beyond her limited resources. And when he confirmed that she had indeed been accepted into the scholarship program, his word carried weight. Still, Victoria was not satisfied. She wanted to prove to everyone, her fans, the gym, and most of all to Kesha, that no outsider could share her stage. She proposed a challenge, dripping with arrogance, 3 rounds in the ring. Not a real match, just sparring, she claimed. But everyone knew the truth. This was no friendly spar. It was a spectacle meant to humiliate Kesha in front of an audience that was already forming, eager to see the drama unfold. For most, that would have been the moment to back down, to save face, to retreat, and accept that this was not the place for someone like her. But Kesha's eyes didn't waver. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't stumble over excuses. Instead, she nodded, quiet but firm, carrying herself with a calmness that unsettled even Tom. Because Kesha Campbell knew something no one else in that room understood yet. She had been underestimated her whole life, and every time someone thought she didn't belong, she had proven them wrong. This was not just about boxing, it was about dignity. And once dignity was challenged, retreat was no longer an option. From the moment Victoria announced her challenge, the gym transformed into a theater. Phones went up instantly, live streams started buzzing, and hashtags began circulating before a single glove had been laced. For Victoria, this was more than sparring. It was content. She strutted around the ring with the swagger of a celebrity, grinning for cameras, adjusting her designer sports gear, and basking in the attention like it was oxygen. Kesha, meanwhile, sat in silence at the edge of the gym, taping her hands with care. There was no team of stylists fussing over her, no entourage hyping her up, just her, a roll of worn tape, and the rhythm of her own breath. She wasn't here to entertain, and she certainly wasn't here for clout. She was here because every sacrifice her family had made depended on her not breaking under pressure. Victoria's taunts grew sharper as the crowd swelled. "This isn't Kingston, sweetheart," she smirked loudly enough for the room to hear. "This is New York, and here champions eat girls like you for breakfast." Laughter erupted, echoing across the walls. Clips of her words were already being uploaded, stitched with captions mocking Kesha's appearance, her accent, her skin. To millions watching online, she was already the loser in this story. But Kesha's mind wasn't on them. Her thoughts drifted to the long mornings back in Kingston, when she shadowboxed on cracked pavement before school, learning to move her body in rhythm with the chaos of the streets. She remembered the underground gyms, where sweat dripped from ceilings and gloves were passed from fighter to fighter because no one could afford new ones. She remembered the bruises she carried to class, the teachers who whispered that boxing was no future for a girl like her, and the neighbors who clapped whenever she returned home victorious. Those experiences had carved her into steel. Every sneer from Victoria was just another echo of the voices she'd already silenced 100 times before. Tom, the veteran trainer, watched quietly from the sidelines. He had trained champions, molded raw talent into polished fighters, but what he saw in Kesha was something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't her stance or her speed, it was her silence. Champions he had known were loud, eager to show their confidence. Kesha's strength came from stillness, from an unspoken certainty that radiated even when she tied her shoes. The tension climbed as the crowd pressed closer to the ring. They weren't here to see a fair fight. They were here for a spectacle, to watch arrogance crush humility, to see the underdog exposed. The crueler it was, the more entertaining it would be. But there was something in Kesha's demeanor that unsettled even the spectators. She didn't look scared. She didn't flinch when the insults landed. If anything, her calmness made Victoria louder, harsher, more desperate to assert control. Arrogance thrives on fear, and Kesha was giving her none. As the gloves were strapped to their wrists, the contrast between them was undeniable. Victoria glowed under the lights, her figure perfectly sculpted, her expression confident to the point of cruelty. Kesha's gloves were borrowed, slightly too big. Her shorts faded from years of wear. To the casual eye, the outcome was already decided. Yet, beneath the surface, an invisible tide was shifting. Kesha's silence wasn't weakness, it was focus. Every heartbeat in her chest synced with memories of survival, of fists thrown not for sport but for survival, of opponents twice her size brought down by persistence alone. She wasn't thinking about the crowd, or the cameras, or even Victoria. She was thinking about her mother back in Jamaica, who whispered every night that dignity was worth defending, no matter the cost. The bell hadn't even rung, yet the fight had already begun, not with punches, but with presence. Victoria tried to dominate the stage, but Kesha's unshakable stillness slowly began to steal attention. Viewers on the live stream noticed, too. Comments shifted ever so slightly, from mocking laughter to uneasy curiosity. Why does she look so calm? Why isn't she scared? And in that moment, the balance of power, though invisible to most, was beginning to tilt. The room had gathered expecting a humiliation. What they were about to witness was something else entirely. The bell rang, sharp and metallic, slicing through the noise of the gym. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Then Victoria exploded forward. Her fists were a blur, practiced and precise, honed by years of professional training. She wasn't holding back, not even in the first few seconds. The crowd roared with every punch, their voices rising like a wave. They wanted blood. They wanted to see the girl from Jamaica collapse under the weight of their champion's fists. But Kesha didn't collapse. She moved. Her body swayed just enough, weaving out of reach, slipping past jabs that had sent trained fighters to the mat. To the casual eye, it looked like luck. To the trained eye, it was instinct. Raw, sharpened instinct born not from luxury gyms, but from the streets of Kingston where hesitation meant bruises and slowness meant defeat. Victoria laughed mid-combination, her arrogance shining through every strike. "Come on!" she barked, throwing hooks with cruel force, punches meant to end careers. Yet with each one, Kesha adjusted, ducking, pivoting, making herself a ghost in the ring. The laughter in the crowd began to soften into murmurs. Phones that had been raised for ridicule now started capturing something else, a girl who refused to break. Then, Kesha struck. It wasn't flashy, just a jab, clean, direct, unexpected. Victoria's head snapped back, and the room froze. For the first time, the champion had been touched. Not by another starfighter, not by a seasoned rival, but by someone the world thought didn't belong. Rage flooded Victoria's face. Pride wounded deeper than flesh. She charged harder, her punches wild now, fueled not by technique, but by anger. She wanted to crush Kesha, to silence the whispers that were already spreading through the gym, to erase the possibility that this girl could stand toe-to-toe with her. But arrogance clouds judgment. And as Victoria unleashed storm after storm, Kesha began to read her like a book. Every overextended hook, every drop of her guard, every ounce of carelessness that came from underestimating her opponent. Kesha saw it all. The second round was different. Kesha's silence turned into movement, her stillness into power. She dodged, countered, jabbed, and stepped back with the calm precision of someone who had been here 1,000 times before. Each punch she landed carried the weight of her journey. Every insult she had swallowed, every job she had worked, every sacrifice her mother had made. The crowd, once jeering, now leaned in with wide eyes. The live stream comments shifted entirely. Who is she? How is she doing this? Clips of Victoria's missed punches, of her being forced back, spread like wildfire. The humiliation she had planned for Kesha was unraveling before her own fans' eyes. By the third round, the tension was unbearable. Victoria's movements grew sloppy, her arrogance melting into desperation. Sweat poured down her face, her breaths ragged, her punches slower. Kesha, battered but unbroken, still stood tall, eyes locked, fists steady, body refusing to quit. And then came the moment. Victoria lunged with everything she had left, a right hook so fierce it echoed through the gym. But Kesha had seen it before it even left her shoulder. She ducked, pivoted, and released her own strike, a left cross, sharp and clean, connecting flush against Victoria's jaw. The sound was deafening. The champion stumbled, her legs betraying her. The crowd gasped, some even screaming. And then, unthinkable. Victoria Sterling, undefeated champion, face of dominance and arrogance, crashed to the canvas. Silence. The gym that had gathered to watch a humiliation was now holding its breath, stunned into disbelief. Phones that had been raised to capture Kesha's downfall had instead recorded history, an underdog refusing to bow, a so-called outsider toppling the queen. The referee's count thundered through the air. 1, 2, 3. Victoria stirred, but her body refused to rise. 7, 8. She clawed at the mat, desperate, but her strength was gone. 9, 10. The bell rang, and it was over. Kesha Campbell had done the unthinkable. She hadn't just survived, she had defeated the champion in her own palace, under her own lights, with the entire world watching. For the first time that night, Kesha raised her hands, not in arrogance, but in quiet defiance. This victory was not for fame, not for applause, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. And the world would never forget it. When the bell echoed through the gym for the last time, silence still hung in the air like smoke. For a few long seconds, no one knew what to do. The crowd, who had come to witness a spectacle of humiliation, were frozen in disbelief. Phones remained raised, but the laughter that once filled the room was gone. On the canvas, Victoria Sterling, once untouchable, undefeated, adored, lay on her side, clutching her jaw, her pride shattered far more than her body. Trainers rushed to her aid, cameras zoomed in, and 1,000 live streams replayed the same shocking moment over and over, the queen of arrogance crumbling beneath the fists of the girl she had mocked. And then came the sound. At first faint, almost hesitant, then louder. Applause. It started with Tom, the veteran trainer who had seen greatness rise and fall for decades. His calloused hands clapped slowly, firmly, as he looked at Kesha with something close to awe. Others followed, first a few, then dozens, then the entire gym erupting into cheers not for their champion, but for the young woman they had dismissed minutes earlier. Kesha didn't celebrate wildly. She didn't taunt or gloat. Instead, she stood quietly in the center of the ring, sweat streaming down her face, her chest heaving from exhaustion. She raised her arms only once, not in showmanship, but in gratitude. For her mother back in Jamaica, for the neighbors who had believed in her, for every person who had ever whispered that she was worth more than the world allowed her to believe. Meanwhile, online, the story exploded. Clips of Victoria's arrogance in the opening minutes were stitched next to the knockout punch, creating a viral narrative of downfall. Memes mocked her pride, while hashtags celebrating Kesha surged across platforms. Kesha the Giant Killer. From Kingston to the ring, a dignity wins. Overnight, the young woman who had walked into the gym as an unknown became a global symbol of resilience. But beneath the noise of the internet and the chaos of the gym, something deeper was shifting. For many watching, especially those who had ever been dismissed because of their race, their gender, or their poverty, Kesha's victory was more than sport. It was proof. Proof that skill and heart cannot be measured by wealth, that dignity cannot be bought or bullied, that resilience can break even the most gilded walls of privilege. Victoria, once the face of dominance, was suddenly the embodiment of fragility. Her defeat was replayed not as a simple loss, but as a lesson. Arrogance built on cruelty eventually collapses. She had underestimated Kesha because of where she came from, because of what she looked like, because she believed some people were born to stand above others. And that belief, more than Kesha's fists, was what had brought her down. In the weeks that followed, whispers turned into conversations. Sports magazines analyzed the fight, not just for its technical shock, but for its cultural weight. Talk shows replayed the footage, debating what it meant for the future of boxing, and for countless young viewers, especially black girls who had never seen themselves represented in spaces of power, Kesha became a beacon. She didn't just win a fight. She carved a space where others could follow. Kesha herself returned to her humble life, unchanged in demeanor. She still worked nights, still sent money home, still carried herself with the same quiet dignity. But wherever she walked now, people noticed. Not because she had humiliated a champion, but because she had reminded the world that greatness is not defined by privilege, but by persistence. And so that night in Manhattan became more than just an upset in the ring. It became a story whispered across communities, a story replayed in homes and classrooms, a story retold in gyms where young fighters dreamed of their own chance to prove themselves. It became a story of dignity versus arrogance, of resilience versus privilege, of a young black woman who refused to be humiliated and instead humiliated the very system that tried to silence her. And as the world remembers Kesha Campbell's unshakable stillness, her storm hidden in silence until the exact moment it was needed, one question lingers. How many more champions of dignity are waiting in the shadows, overlooked and underestimated, until the day the world finally realizes their power?